Thanks, Chris. Yes, there are a lot of secret places, and I think one of the ways to find them is you just need to keep coming back to Cape Cod and having more experiences. So it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. I first met Leslie Jonas 2 years ago when Kara was applying for a NOAA grant in partnership with the Woods Hole Sea grant. And she was extremely helpful and instrumental in the whole process, but little did I know just how accomplished and how many things that she had to brag about, and I'm gonna brag about a few of them right now. So Leslie's a native Cape Codder. She's an elder eel clan member of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. She holds a BA in Mass Communications and Television Production from Emerson College, an MS in Community Economic Development, and is certified in DEI from Cornell University. Some pretty impressive universities. In almost every role she has served, her work is centered on environmental activism, indigenous land and water conservation, climate change adaptation, cultural preservation of lifeways, and environmental justice. As a founding board officer, Leslie has spent the last 13 years helping to build the first Native Land Conservation Trust east of the Mississippi, the Native Land Conservancy. Leslie co-teaches and advises an Indigenous environmental planning course in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. Leslie is MIT's Martin Luther King Jr. Visiting Scholar Professor in Anthropology and the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. She was an Indigenous Advisory Board member of the State of Massachusetts Conservation Law Foundation from 2020 to 2024. She sits on the state's Justice 40 Advisory Board and is the first Mashpee Wampanoag to sit in the Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Commission. Leslie holds a significant role as a research administrator and first ever tribal liaison at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, WHOI, on Cape Cod. And in these two capacities, she is crucial in providing Indigenous relationality and programmatic support to leading scientists, enabling them to implement their research work supporting our oceans and coastal communities. She lives between Falmouth and Cambridge. Obviously, we're working at MIT. She's back and forth, but we're happy to have her mostly on Cape Cod, and I'd like to welcome you up here, Leslie Jonas.
Get this back here. Wanikisak, that's good morning in Wampanoag. Natasuis Mikwan Nipawak I Nutomas Masipiat. It's really great to be here. My native name is Standing Feather, and I am Mashpee Wampanoag. I was honored to be asked to present here today as a native of these lands and these waters. Are you okay?
Okay. We're getting there.
Yeah. No, we had it down this morning, so it goes this way, doesn't it? So just make that really small. But yeah, so wonderful to be here. We're going to jump right in. This is a presentation I've been making lately around the Indigenous concept of relationality. So as an elder Eel Clan member of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, we are known as the people of the first light. We are northeastern woodlands coastal people. We live here on the Cape, the islands of Noepe, also known as Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. And then we have an extended territory throughout Massachusetts, some say west to the Blackstone River and north to the Merrimack. We are quite the tight-knit community, wrapped in our rich, strong, and beautiful culture here, one that has existed for millennia and is evidenced by how close we live to the land and the waters of Cape Cod. We are first contact people. We were here and we are still here. We greeted the settlers, and you might have read about us in those Thanksgiving stories in your earlier textbooks. But truth be told, we're here, and we're always going to be here for the next 7 generations. We have been here for 12,000 plus years. Our leadership model is both spiritual and legislative, as we have a tribal council, a chief, and a medicine man. We include a tribal judicial branch as well after we developed our tribal court back in 2011 and 2012. But many Eastern tribes divide our groups of related people or families into clans. And we trace these clans through the maternal line, the family's connection to the natural world. And in our Wampanoag culture, our family clans are divided and symbolized by animals from the 3 earth elements of land, water, and air. So currently, as you can see, we have 8 clans: the bear, eagle, rabbit, otter, turtle, beaver, eel, and deer. Like I said, we've been here for some 12,000 plus years, and in our indigenous environmental land and water life ways and practices, we work with natural ecosystems for a holistic plan of sustainability and revitalization, always keeping this natural world up front, but also understanding the grave losses that we've witnessed over many decades in these natural habitats. So we consistently seek to stabilize them. We work to protect and revitalize and restore native species on the land and the waters to reinvigorate those ecosystems that have kept these spaces in balance for millennia. But it was this woman right here, it was Rachel Carson in Silent Spring, who said, "The more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for destruction. Mankind has gone very far into an artificial world of his own creation. He has sought to insulate himself with steel and concrete from the realities of earth and water as he goes farther and farther into experiments for the destruction of himself and his world." So in contemplating the exceeding beauty of the earth, there is this symbolic as well as actual beauty in the simple migration of birds, in the ebb and flow of the tides, and the folded bud ready for spring. There is something infinitely healing in these repeated refrains of nature. The assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. Carson's passionate concern in Silent Spring was with the future of the planet and all life on Earth. She called for humans to act responsibly, carefully, and as stewards of the living earth. What Rachel Carson was asking for in Silent Spring, for humans to act responsibly and carefully and as stewards of the living earth, is something Indigenous cultures have been doing for thousands of years, as land and water have always been central to our existence. There's a new movement that's begun in the past decade and picking up pace over the past few years, which is the inclusion of traditional ecological knowledge. Some of you may have heard of this, or different ways of knowing. These different ways of knowing are practices that have taken place within Indigenous communities for thousands of years. And it was in the Biden administration back in 2020 and 2021, don't know if you can recall, who put MOUs out to the federal agencies requesting that all of the federal agencies work with local tribes or Indigenous communities to include different ways of knowing in the research, the work, medical, science, higher ed, conservation, include these different ways of knowing in the work that we were doing. This was a first of its kind. So what is traditional ecological knowledge? It is a knowledge-based system of ancient wisdom that's passed down through generations of people living in relationship, in kinship to the land and the water, a kind of human relationship to the land and the water that always has and always will be in balance and beneficial to all. However, what's been missing from Western science since the beginning of time is indigenous knowledge, which is an apparent widespread absence of any historic knowledge of traditional tenure on these lands. Tech is abstract, it is qualitative, and created over long periods of time, from experience and observation, from living with, in, and on land and water, and all of its plants and creatures. Tech is inclusive, it's intuitive, holistic, reciprocal, coexisting, and spiritual, carrying the social values of the communities from which it comes. It is not stationary, it is constantly changing, it is evolving. It's an ancient knowledge system that can change over long periods of time based on the ever-changing conditions of our environments. Our stories from our oral tradition happen based on centuries of observing and being in relationship with. But it includes the modifications and the adjustments that we have to make to continue to stay connected, to adapt, and preserve our precious cultural life ways as a result of these changing environmental conditions. So we have to interpret the changing conditions and the information differently to preserve the link, the relationship between the changing biodiversity and our cultural diversity. It's a multi-layered web of history, of information, translation, and transmission of information, time, spiritual connectedness, experiences, and culture. It is about people living with and on the land and water from which we come and communicating on all of the different ways that we can help her to heal. So that's a little bit, generally speaking, about how we Wampanoag live here on the Cape and Cape Cod land and water, but I'm going to share a little bit about my environmental history and activism. I sit on a number of local, state, and federal environmental boards that were mentioned earlier, so I won't repeat them. I think it's interesting, though, and I see my friend here at the first table, Mark Robinson, who will speak tomorrow morning, that I am the first Native American to sit on the Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Commission, and that happened in 2024. So after being here for 12,000 years, maybe Biden's MOUs really did take place. What I'm really lucky to talk about is that I grew up here. I come from the dirt, as I say, and the water. And I began my nonprofit environmental work early in my life at the New Alchemy Institute in Hatchville in Falmouth on Cape Cod. It is now called the Green Center. New Alchemy was a pioneering institute that investigated organic farming, agriculture, aquaculture, and bioshelter with very little reliance on fossil fuels. It was, at the time, cutting-edge technology, creating alternative systems that would set the tone for a greener future. The Institute's work modeled greener, self-sustaining systems. Part of my job at the time was to assist the alchemists in maintaining the land in order to research all of these human support systems that they were researching and building. These were support systems of food, water, and shelter, and much greener ways to do this. But very importantly, I helped them to rethink and replan how these systems were designed based on the original Western designs. But I was really in the dirt, too. I prepared massive garden beds and created compost piles the size of small houses. But one of my fondest memories was that I got to learn how to drive a 1960 3-speed on-the-column Ford pickup at 13 years old. And I truly felt more alive doing this work than I've felt doing anything else in my life so far. What we had to do also was we built fences and stone walls to keep certain creatures in and other creatures out. It really truly has been, probably in my life so far, my all-time favorite job. living and working so closely to the land. And I talk about this because it really, truly did shape a lot of my worldview today. But given what's been happening for hundreds of years in our natural world, whether it's deforestation and clear cutting, extractive industries, corporate pollution, and human impact, just straight up human impact, I really want to talk about the importance of protecting our forests. I'll start out with a wide lens, in that our beautiful forests globally cover 1/3 of the Earth's land surface, and that's about 15.6 million square miles. But looking at some of the global data, during the 20 years between 2000 and 2020, the global intact forest landscapes, also known as IFLs, lost about 12% of their area, and this 12% is equivalent to a threefold area of Spain. So what's an intact forest? An intact forest landscape is a seamless mosaic of forest and naturally treeless ecosystems within the zone, which exhibit no remotely detected signs of human activity or habitat fragmentation, and is large enough to maintain all native biological diversity, including viable populations of very wide-ranging species. So IFLs have high conservation yield and are critical for stabilizing terrestrial carbon storage, harboring biodiversity, regulating hydrological regimes, and providing many other ecosystem functions. Essentially, the data is gathered through satellites. These map and monitor the remaining forest wildlands globally through these publicly available satellite images, and they can detect most forest conversion and industry fragmentation. So you might ask, who's most responsible for the loss of our forests globally? Russia, Canada, Bolivia, Brazil, Indonesia, and Peru are responsible for 70% of the total IFL loss area, with Russia having the highest increase of the annual IFL loss by 140% between the 7-year time period of 2013 and 2020. We then ask, what's the main driver of global deforestation? Most, if not all of you, know that it's agriculture. Logging is pretty close, but it's beef and soy that are the leading drivers. So this chart shows the loss over a 10,000-year timeline from the Earth's surface of forests, shrubs, and grasslands, and essentially humans have destroyed 1/3 of the world's forests by agriculture. Given this loss, what then might be some of the solutions to traditional agriculture? Well, there's an increase in conversations to produce food more sustainably, vertical farming, greenhouses, but we need to do better. And I truly look forward to the days when vast areas of land aren't cleared for beef and soy. And so where does the greatest deforestation happen? In the tropics, of course. So looking at estimates of deforestation from the latest UN forest report, to put these numbers in context, during the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s, an area half the size of India was deforested. But even with improved rates in the 2010s, which is considered some progress, but really does need to happen much faster, the data here shows raw deforestation rates without any adjustment for regrowth or the plantation of new forests. And these are arguably not as good as the original forests. They're not as good for the ecosystems. They're not as good for carbon storage because new growth doesn't always offset the initial loss. Essentially, my point is the world is still losing large amounts of primary forests every year. In the tropics, we watch and hear of the devastating stories of the continued assaults on rainforests in places like the Amazon. And this is particularly tragic because these are regions with the highest levels of biodiversity and the most ancient indigenous communities who have lived with and on their lands in the ancestral ways that they always have for thousands and thousands of years. And these are the Amazon's indigenous peoples who are responsible for shaping the Amazon by the trees they've cultivated over millennia. They have a distinctly profound impact on the rainforest's composition. Some of these trees you've heard of, and they include the Brazil nut, cacao, the palm, acai berry, and the rubber tree. In this photo, these young men have harvested acai berries. And recently, researchers recorded that many of these tree species populating the Amazon region appear to be abundant because they were cultivated by these native peoples who populated the area for many millennia pre-European contact. And while tropical rainforests cover about 7% of the Earth's dry land, they are home to about half of all the species on Earth. Now, while I'm always interested in the general status and condition of our forests worldwide, because it's typically an indication of what's going on geopolitically, agriculturally, industrially, developmentally, and environmentally around the world, I'll move a little closer to home in the Northeast. Our job in conserving our land and forest landscapes is a responsibility of great significance. And as the planet's stewards, there is a responsibility that flows from we humans to the earth through the act of reciprocal relationships. So as we zoom in closer to home and look at this region, well, we're lucky in comparison to the kinds of threats that are happening worldwide. This isn't to say that we should sit back idly and comfortably relish in the pristine landscapes that drape our gorgeous views and provide us with visually drop-dead backdrops to our lives here that are second to none, quite frankly. The kinds of views that are deservingly seen in publications like National Geographic. But what we ought to do is consider a new or renewed relationship to our land and forests and take an approach that's more aligned with indigenous worldviews. By this I mean recognizing a worldview that ensures our land and forests' future, and in doing so ensures that your children and their children are on board with this. That they too understand the land and the forest's value and our responsibility to stewarding and caring for her. So all of these interactions, connections, interrelations speak to the power of relationality, our relationship to our land, forests, and water. A connectedness to these places, to the land and the water, the day and the night sky, to the spirit world of our ancestors who walked before us, to one another, to family, to community, and to all living creatures on this earth. It is a lived experience where our kin, our relationships, are tied to our past, present, and future on these lands. Here on Cape Cod, and not very far from here, we celebrated our own old-growth forest. Provincetown's beech forest joined the Old Growth Forest Network a couple of years ago. P-Town, as we call it, is the southernmost tip of the Cape. As you can see over there, it's the fist at the tip. And when the settlers arrived in the early 17th century, much of the Cape's backdrop was covered in pine oak forest and groves of hickory, red maple, birch, and beech trees. Over the next 200 years, the settlers cleared almost all of these forests. But due to this particular forest's low-lying position, it was spared from the logging. So as I celebrate our old growth forest here on the Cape, I want to highlight another tree, our popular eastern white pine. This white pine is revered across indigenous cultures as a symbol of wisdom, longevity, and peace, and we are grateful for their gifts of medicine, fuel, and food, and for their spiritual gifts, as author, educator, and botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer describes. Pines are understood as among our eldest teachers. In fact, they are of an ancient lineage in the tree world and have seen much change across the earth. In Wampanoag culture, we are matrilineal, which means the women lead and we are led by our clan mothers. When families lived together in the longhouse and a male was disturbing the peace, disrupting the balance in the longhouse, The women would send the men out, or the male out, to a white pine to stand up against the white pine, stand his back up against the white pine until he could clear himself of the bad energy and recenter. And once he had recentered himself, he would be allowed back into the longhouse. It's a very highly spiritual healing tree. My favorite Potawatomi author, educator, and botanist, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Many of you may have read Braiding Sweetgrass, Gathering Moss, and Serviceberry. She so eloquently describes this as she talks about trees as our teachers. In this clip, she shares on the connection, the respect and honor in how we see the woods and the forests as a gift filled with wonder, life, and medicine.
And once you come to know the different beings that are around you, you see not only stories, but the way that the land cares for you. Just standing in this place, I see the food of the hickory, the food of the maples, the string of the basswood, and I see medicine. Right here in front of us, that black, flaky bark is a black cherry. And did you ever wonder why cough drops almost always come in black cherry flavor? It's because black cherry is a cough medicine. And the bark of the twigs of that tree boiled down make a really good soothing cough medicine. And so yes, you look at the world as full of biodiversity and these amazing beings living their lives, but they also are in relationship with us. And you see the cedars, really good respiratory medicine. We'll get close to one later. We came by a hemlock, which is super good for colds. It has tons of vitamin C in it. So they're medicines. They're medicines all around us to be honored, to be respected. And in fact, in our Potawatomi language, the word for plants is mishkakin, which means the medicines, but it also means, if you take that word mishkakin apart, it means the strength of the earth. And so when we talk about plants healing us, they're healing us with the strength of the earth. And to feel that and to feel all those gifts that are all around you makes the woods into a very different place.
Our forests do, in fact, make a future by healing us with the strength of the earth, with her life and her medicine. And it is through a subsistence worldview. This refers to the complex set of cultural relationships that make up this worldview, based upon an ancient traditional knowledge of the natural world. In Indigenous cultures, oral tradition and cultural life ways were passed from generation to generation through the repetition of lived experiences, stories, ceremonial practices, and relationships, kinships to the natural world. These stories, for us, represent unparalleled forms of truth-telling, offering a nuanced history that's unavailable from any other source. It is a record, it is a continuum of our relationships and our ancestral ways of resilience, resistance, joy, strength, pride, and hope. And not through a colonized lens, but one of our very own, evidenced by our own Indigenous knowledges and survival skills that have always provided for us and sustained us. And it is in these spaces where thousands of year-old histories and stories are held. Stories that depict our relationality to all living things, generations and generations of people living in relationship, in kinship to the land and the water. A kind of human relationship to the land and the water that always has and always will be in balance and beneficial for all living creatures. It is place-based. It's about gratitude and reciprocity in a place.
Applied. There's so many elements to that. It does remind us that as human people, we are one species in this whole web of kinship, and that natural law applies to us and our economic and political structures, just as it does for the ecosystem. And we humans, thinking again about what does it mean to be human, we Western humans anyway, seem to have this fiction that the laws of nature don't apply to us. We're at this top of this pyramid, fictional pyramid, of human exceptionalism, and that kindly the world has, repealed the laws of thermodynamics on behalf of our own society. I don't think so. So this notion of living in reciprocity reminds us that we are subject to natural law, and that we could structure our societies in ways that harmonize with natural law, which makes life much easier and also is joyful and just. So to me, that is a big element of reciprocity, is remembering that we humans are not just takers, and the earth is not just our property, but we are givers as well, that we are essential to the functioning of the planet as reciprocal givers in return for all the gifts that Mother Earth gives us.
How we view our land and forests is vital to their future. They're our elders, they're wise and learned. These elder trees hold the forest's complex web of life together. They teach their young to go out into the world to thrive, and when their young ail, they send some of their best energy, vitamins, and rich food to them through their root systems, reminding us of how inherently intelligent they are. They are constantly giving and providing endless gifts, teaching us the most important ways of being here on earth, how we share and how we give back. These ancient elders are the wisest of us all, and we ought to rewild ourselves back to them. Let's hear from Robin again on some of these teachings.
We're going to get back to this.
So the concept of a gift economy is deeply embedded in Indigenous cultures because of our ancestrally rooted value systems of living in reciprocity with not just the natural world, but our communities and our families. It speaks to our communal ties by giving and receiving, planting, foraging, and harvesting, baking that homemade blueberry pie, frying some herring, or steaming a basket of clams for thy elder neighbor or an auntie. In this way, we are in constant appreciation of the earth's bounty as a gift and not an extracted resource. In Serviceberry, Robin, you wrote that receiving a gift from the land is coupled to the responsibilities of sharing, of respect, of reciprocity, and gratitude, a kind of gratitude that brings us to the realization that our lives are nurtured, completely nurtured from the body of the Earth Mother. But in an increasingly resource extractive and overdeveloped world, can you help us to understand the benefits of a circular relationship that you talked about a little earlier, but one directly between people and the earth?
When we start to think about the world, the earth, as you said, is gifts of Mother Earth, not natural resources, not commodities, not private property, but gifts from a loving Mother Earth. Think about in your own life, if the example I like to use is if you went to the store and bought a pair of socks, and they were woolly and red and comfy, but when you exchanged money for them, when money was the currency of the well-being of your toes, you don't have any responsibility to those socks. You could take care of them, or you could let the dog chew them up, but they're your property, right? But what if those socks were hand knit for you by your loving grandma? Oh, they still keep your feet warm, right? They're still red and fuzzy, but everything is different because the currency of those socks is not money. It's love, it's gratitude, it's relationship. And to me, that's the difference between this market economy and a gift economy. The currency is not money. The currency is relationship and love and gratitude. So we behave very, very differently when that is the currency. And the beautiful thing is, you know, when you buy those socks at the store, do you feel like you want to go to the clerk and give her a birthday present? You have no relationship. But what about when it's your grandma's birthday? You want to reciprocate the gift with an equally loving framework, right? i.e., it invites reciprocity. It invites us to remember as human beings that we all have gifts, and that that's the responsibility. We say we are given gifts, but those gifts are coupled to the responsibility to use them because the whole world needs them.
Especially when those gifts are woven, the socks are woven from the milkweed off of the land, and the redness comes from the cranberry or the blueberry or the berries that create the dye. So the qualitative approach has such longer term impacts in terms of how we respect and live with and on the land.
Absolutely, and I love how you framed that in terms of the materials that went into those socks. Mm-hmm. When we know there are plant relatives, for example, it makes them all the more precious. I think the key in our contemporary consumerist society is to remember that every pair of socks, shall we say, every single thing that we buy is a gift of Mother Earth. I mean, that everything. And if we treat all that we consume as a gift from Mother Earth, we are now into the realm of the honorable harvest, as opposed to the dishonorable harvest, in which we just take as if it wasn't the lives of our plant and animal relatives that we're consuming.
Right. So in respecting the honorable harvest approach, I recognize that some of the most promising work to protect our land, water, and forests will not come from just one worldview, but from different ways of knowing. And many have heard of two-eyed seeing, which is a unique perspective that highlights seeing from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledge and ways of knowing. And learning to use both of these eyes together, utilizing both lenses from multiple perspectives and contexts for the benefit of all. From its interconnectivity and the power of its great capacity, it brings reciprocity and responsibility into the science. It's a mutual responsibility. It will come from a collective action. One action not more important than the other, but instead collectively reflects our shared values in the protection of these sacred spaces. You see, our environment here on Cape Cod has taken a hit from hundreds of years of tourism. And now year-round tourism. What was once just the summer people, as we called them, are now year-rounders. And we welcome visitors and new residents. We're not cold. But many come here and they live and play very hard on the land and the water, year-round. After all, it's one of the world's most beautiful places on Earth. So as you go through the week and talk about sustainable tourism to protect beautiful and natural sites, think about the ways to teach the world about being more than just sustainable practices, like volunteerism and engaging in reparative work to preserve and protect, but to also build a relationship to these places, to honor and respect such a place. So as we look to the Earth Mother to continue to guide us, and remember that many humans from the current generation, as well as many from the past, are paying the price for the small-minded view that asserts that this natural capital is infinite and the quality constant. A kind of dishonorable harvest, if you will. But being good kin and good relationship to the Earth Mother, we ought to honor her and foster more connection and healing through our relationship to her. So I'm going to close with my favorite question to Robin Wall Kimmerer that wrapped up my fireside chat. One of my favorite topics as a mother. In Braiding Sweetgrass, A Mother's Work, you talk about being a good mother means teaching your children to care for the world. And I talk about this a lot, about those next generations, and how we ought to nurture the natural world. You talk about this, Robin. A tree being a good mother nurtures a full crop of apples by gathering the energy of the world into herself and passing it on. The tree sending her young out into the world well provisioned. Her young are the apples, of course, well provisioned for the journey, packaged in sweetness to share with the world. This resonates with me so deeply it could bring tears to my eyes right now. To bring more light to this, can you share with us how your idea of motherhood is rooted in Mother Nature herself?
Don't look at me like that. We'll both cry. When I think about the incredible generosity of the living world, of Mother Earth, you know, there's a chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass when what is it? The epiphany in the beans, that moment when I realize that my garden loves me back. My garden is feeding me. The woods are feeding me. The river is teaching me what I need to know. Everything that I need to live is provided for me by the earth. It is our generous mother, not only in physical provisioning, the way our moms give us life from their own bodies, and then nurture us as infants from their own bodies. That is my experience of Mother Earth, to know that my life, and therefore the life of my beloveds, is completely contingent upon the gifts of Mother Earth. And so in Potawatomi ways, when we talk about Mother Earth, it's not just a loose metaphor for generosity. It is that knowing that we are loved like children from the body of our mother. And when we really recognize that, when we really feel that love from the land, if we could feel that, it seems to me, perhaps naively, that would change the way that we behave. Would we harm the one who loves us? I don't know that we would. And so the language and the teachings and the deep physical and emotional and spiritual understanding of the earth as mother and the love that we are showered with leaves no room for harm for her. You wouldn't harm your mother. And so the deep emotional and spiritual engagement with this idea of our earthly mother is one of the most powerful and transcendent elements of our Indigenous worldview and wisdom.
For she is the giver of all life. Katapatanamu, thank you all very much.